Hi, in this lesson we're talking about complex trinomial factoring. Complex trinomial factoring looks like something like this. And why we call it a complex trinomial factoring? Because the coefficient of x squared is no longer positive 1. It's anything but positive 1. And it is trinomial. And you cannot have a common factor of 2 because 2 doesn't go into negative 1, which is the middle term, the coefficient of x, and 2 also doesn't go into 3 or negative 3. So this is an example of complex trinomial of quadratic relations. So our goal is to factor, and there's a few methods to apply to factor this complex trinomial. First, I'm going to go through a decomposition method, then I'm going to show you another method, very shorter method than decomposition method, whichever you feel more comfortable, or it's your choice. So, to factor this, always find your product. Your product of complex trinomial is first times last. And your sum is the middle term as always. Doesn't matter if it's a simple trinomial factoring or complex trinomial factoring. Your sum is always the middle term. Your product changes. In this case, your product is first times the last term, which is negative 6. And sum is negative 1. So you look for two numbers that multiplies gives you negative 6. When you add them, should equal to negative 1. So of course, negative 3 times 2 is negative 6 because negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. Now, once we found these integers that satisfies both condition, then we're going to substitute it instead of negative 1x, negative 3x plus 2x. So the first and last term stays the same. 2x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 3. Like I said, why are we doing this? In order to factor using decomposition method. And then the next step would be grouping. The first two and the last two, you group them. Don't put bracket, because what if the sign is not positive, could be negative, then it will change the sign here. So it's better to group them like this, and this is the sign that separates those two pair of terms. It comes down right there, that sign, whatever it is, if it's positive or negative. So, once we group, our next step is common factor here. You have to take the greatest common factor, and also here. So the greatest common factor here would be x. And what we left with is 2x minus 3. So what's the greatest common factor here? Just 1, because 1 goes into 2 and 1 goes into negative 3. So we open bracket 2x minus 3. So once you reach this step, you just stop right there. You make sure that every step is correct. How do you know that so far you're doing the right steps? Just because of this two pair of brackets right here, these brackets. Whatever inside this bracket must match this bracket. If these two doesn't match, then you went somewhere wrong. Maybe here the common factor or you grouping. So this is where you check your steps. These two brackets must match in both terms, because our last step would be common factor again. So after grouping, we do common factor and one more step of common factor, and we done, and we factored. So the common factor here is between this term and this term is 2x minus 3, because 2x minus 3 I have here and there, so I can take that out as common factor, and what I left with outside the bracket x and plus 1 with the sign, and that's factor. This is called factoring complex trinomial by decomposition method. So it's best to recognize what type of factoring you're dealing with and then apply the right method in order to factor. So this was one of the methods that I used to factor complex trinomial. There's another method also, the shorter, the faster method. So I'm going to erase just this part of the question right here. And remember, the answer was 2x minus 3 and x plus 1 in terms of the factoring. Now, so we take it from here. So once we find our integers that satisfies the condition, the product and sum, then what do is I take the negative 3 and comma positive 2. I divide both of them by the leading coefficient of x squared. 2 and 2. Since it's x squared, then you can throw an x and x. If it was y squared, throw y and y. Alright? Hope that makes sense. Then we're going to open pair of brackets right underneath them. Before we put them in bracket, we want to make sure that we can reduce. See if we can reduce. I know I cannot reduce 2 and 3, but I can reduce 2 and 2 goes once. Now we can throw them in the bracket. The bottom part goes right here, right after the bracket. 2x and 1x right there. The top part goes right beside it. So it's negative 3 and then positive 1. And you can see that we matched exactly the previous example that we did using decomposition method or this shortcut. It gives you the exact same answer. 2x minus 3 times x plus 1. If you expand this, it should get back to the original equation. Let's do another example of complex trinomial just to satisfy the lesson and to make sure that you understand the right way. Our goal is to give you enough tools in your notes in order to use that tools to be able to do your homework or other practice questions that you have to do from your textbook. So I have 3x squared plus x minus 4. An example. That's a complex trinomial factoring. So how are we going to apply this to factor? We're going to find our product. Our product is first times last, which is negative 12. And our sum is the middle term, which is positive 1. So we find two integers that multiplies gives you negative 12. The same integers should add up to be positive 1. So we know that 4 times 3 is 12. And the difference between 4 and 3 is 1. So which one should carry the negative sign? The smaller number. And the larger number should carry the positive sign, because negative 3 plus 4 is positive 1. Or plus 4 minus 3 is positive 1. So we have negative 3 plus 4. See, the same integers, which is equal to positive 1. So these integers satisfies both conditions. And what we do, I'm going to show you the shortcut, and I'm sure you're more comfortable and the shortcut than the decomposition way, which everyone likes to do things in a simpler way, an easier way, and quicker way. So once we find the integers negative 3 and 4, then what we do, we divide both of these integers by the leading coefficient of degree 2, whatever the value of a is. So b3, you throw an x with it also, and 3x. Then we open pair of brackets right underneath them. So before we throw them in the bracket, what we do? We reduce. So 3 goes into 3 once and once. And this here we cannot reduce. So then we can throw them in the bracket. Remember, the bottom part goes right after the bracket. So be x. And the top come right beside it, which is negative 1, because we reduce. So it's negative 1 instead of negative 3. Here we have 3x. And since this is positive 4, we bring it right beside it as positive 4. And this is how you factor complex trinomial, the very shortest method and very accurate method and shortest. So you can practice this question over and over, and then once you really understand how to do this, apply to your other activity questions or homework questions. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I would really appreciate a good comment, of course, and a thumbs up. So till next time, take care.